Hey, Husker fans, welcome to another episode of the Husker Big Red podcast with Chris Peterson and Danny Gillette. As always, go Big Red. Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of the Husker Big Red podcast. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always is Danny Gillette, and we're back here on Monday morning after another somewhat busy weekend for Nebraska. Not the best weekend overall with the basketball team losing, but got plenty to talk about, a little bit of some recruiting updates here. But Danny, how you doing on this Monday morning, man?
I wish the basketball team got the victory on Saturday, but the road blues continue, so I can't say I'm surprised. But boy, that was a rough one.
That was a rough one, and the Huskers will have to get that figured out, those road woes, if they want to make the NCAA tournament. We'll get into that here in just a second. Before we get the show started here, before we get into our topics today, make sure, please, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future content or anything like that. But yeah, as you said, Danny, it was a rough weekend, for Nebraska basketball, and they were a 5-point underdog against Maryland. But man, just the way that the game, played out, they started hot. They started on a 12-2 run. They made, 5 3-pointers in the first half, but man, it went downhill from there. The defense fell apart. They basically in the first half, they just were destroyed by turnovers. I think they had 17 in the game. And just their NET ranking, they dropped from 47 to 63. Because when margin of victory really matters, and they got blown out in that game. And frankly, if they don't find a way to win some road games, they're not going to be dancing in March. And that's just the reality at this point.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating. Like a Jekyll and Hyde act between the home and the road games, but giving up leads has been a problem for this team this season. Usually we see it in the second half, but it quickly spiraled downhill. It was like a boulder rolling down a hill, and it just was not good. I knew this game honestly would be tough coming in because Maryland is a very tough place to play, but I didn't expect it to be as decisive as it was on Saturday, because once Maryland got momentum, it just completely snowballed from there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you look back at some of these other games, yes, they, played poorly against Maryland, but when you look back at the Minnesota game and they had a double-digit lead, and the Rutgers game, I mean, those are two. You win those two games right now. I mean, they're sitting at 17-4, and there's 7-3 in the Big Ten Conference right now. So I mean, those are the games that yes, you have to play better on Saturday against Maryland, but I mean, those two games against Rutgers and Minnesota, like those are especially looking very painful right now when you look at their tournament resume.
Well, honestly, I think Saturday was a little bit of a microcosm of, as you mentioned, Rutgers, Minnesota, now Maryland. I think it's not a trend because it would have to be multiple games in a row, I think, but it's definitely something that has been hampering the team this season. And man, the Minnesota game without Garcia on the floor for a good portion of the game, that one really sticks out to me as a game that, really one that got away. Rutgers is tough in Rutgers, and Maryland is tough in Maryland, but the Minnesota game really is kind of looming large to me here as Nebraska tries to, make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, Nebraska, unfortunately, they played right into Maryland's hand, and they turned the ball over 17 times, like we said. And I guess a big thing, Nebraska made 10 3-pointers, but they only attempted 21, and they only attempted 22 2-point shots and made only 7. So I mean, you can't shoot under 33% on 2-pointers and expect to win a game. That's just not going to happen. And then they gave up. I mean, again, Maryland is a team that was only making like 5 3-pointers per game, and Nebraska gives up 11. I mean, this is the worst 3-point defense in the conference, and it's every single game against every single team. There hasn't been a single opponent that's faced Nebraska in Big Ten play that's made fewer than 8 3-pointers in a game. I mean, that's just atrocious. And I know that they haven't had, Juwan Gary out the last 3 games, but I really don't understand why they're 3-point. I mean, it's just there are guys that at times they'll just be too aggressive, and then the contests are. I mean, they're just wide open at times.
Yeah.
Way too many wide open threes, and you can't, like in college basketball in the Big Ten, like you can't even, a lazy contest. Like even if you're right there, a lazy contest is basically giving up free points. And Nebraska's in multiple spots where they can't even contest it. they're so out of position they can't even realistically contest the shot. Like if you're having to run and contest the shot, that's not a contested shot, that's a wide open shot. And
Yeah.
Nebraska gives up way too many of those, and I just don't understand why.
Creighton and Wisconsin are two games in particular that stick out to me, where they really looked bad on their contests in particular, and then obviously Maryland on Saturday. It's one of those things where, I mean, I guess it would be easy for me to say since I'm not, coaching or, watching film, but to me, like if I was the coach, if I was Coach Hoiberg, I would, maybe recognize this and try to fix something or address something. Because honestly, by this point, I would rather give up the easy two inside than to let teams go bananas from the perimeter. Because once the team gets hot, like a Creighton or a Wisconsin from deep, it's very difficult to stop them. And their rotations have been poor. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, a contest when the ball is already out of the shooter's hand and halfway towards the basket is not a good contest. And it's really coming back to bite Nebraska. Truthfully, I think they did a little bit better on their defensive rotations last year than they have this year. And, they did I feel like they did a better job last year, overall defensively. And again, they didn't have Juan Gary last year, but they still managed to, make something of it. This team, I feel like, is just a little too disorganized defensively.
Yeah, and another thing, I mean, we mentioned it last week in the game that they won, but Keisei Tominaga again only played in 21 minutes and just did not play well. Took a lot of bad shots, was 3 of 10 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3, just early shot clock 3-pointers that he doesn't need to make, doesn't need to attempt. And I mean, it's one thing if he's making them, but he's not right now. And if he's not making threes, I mean, he's not a great defender. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he hasn't really taken a step in his game. And we haven't even seen the Keisei Tominaga that we saw for in the last like 10 or 12 games last year, when that player has never arrived this season. So I'm not sure if it's because teams have scouted him and figured him out. It doesn't seem like he's as active cutting to the basket. Maybe that's just the way they're not using they don't have Derek Walker. And I mean, it's not like he's the only one. I mean, Rink Mast wasn't good. Bryce Williams wasn't good. Jamarcus Lawrence had a terrible day. And
Jamarcus Lawrence has had a really bad season.
Yeah, I thought that he would be better too, especially at the point guard position and taking care of the ball and just kind of even running the offense. But they had times where they could barely get into their offense. I mean, that was so bad, and some of the turnovers were just terrible. So I don't know. It's a kind of at a loss for words. I honestly thought they were going to win the game. I don't know why I thought that with their road, woes. I just I don't know. I just really expected Rink Mast. I thought that they would pound the ball inside. I mean, I obviously thought Maryland was going to be a tough team to beat, but I didn't. It was nowhere in my brain that they were going to get beat by like 26 or whatever the hell it was, 24 or whatever. I mean, it was embarrassing, and it's not, like NAT. The NAT rankings, they do take in margin of victory. And Nebraska had this happen to them last year, where it's like you can't have these bad performances. You can't, So they've got Wisconsin on Thursday, and then Illinois on Sunday. Yeah, that Wisconsin game is huge. Like,
and Wisconsin, I think the last time we faced them, they were 21st in the country. Now I believe they've moved up. I don't have the rankings with me handy right now, but they are a very good basketball team, and they will beat you. And I personally think they're one of the most dangerous teams in the Big Ten. And so, I mean, with the terrible closeouts, and they also have a very good player inside, and Aaron Wall, I believe his name is. I mean, that's another game that can go, not well. And I don't know, to me, and maybe you can kind of speak on this too if you want. Derek Walker last year brought in an element of physicality that was beneficial to both the offensive side and the defensive side of football. He established a physical presence inside, and he did that throughout his entire Nebraska career. Josiah Alik can sometimes do it. Rink Mast is not that type of player. So I'm wondering if the physicality that Walker brought to the table is what's making some of these players like Tominaga and Lawrence slump, due to the fact that teams have to kind of account for him in the paint.
Yeah, I mean, I think potentially. I think some of it. I mean, Rink has had some good. I mean, he had a great
Yeah.
night. Earlier this in the other win last week. So I'm not sure exactly what the deal is. I mean, I know that they've really missed Juwan Gary defensively. I mean, he's really been kind of the linchpin for this team, and Bryce Williams just doesn't play very much defense. And so I don't know. It's gut check time for this team, but they play Wisconsin Thursday. And then at Illinois Saturday. So yeah, Wisconsin's number 13, Illinois is number 10, although they just lost so they'll probably drop Northwestern, just beat them. But and then yeah, after that it's Northwestern on the road. So I mean, right now, if Nebraska's 5-5 in the Big Ten, I believe,
Yeah.
and so like you've got to win. I mean, they can't go on a 4-game losing streak, and so this Wisconsin game is vital. And then I mean, I still think they got to win one of those other two. You got to find a way to get through this 4-game stretch. We said that about 2-2, or I mean, at least 1-3. But if you go 0-4 in this stretch, then you're in real. I mean, then you're in a situation where you're going to have to win. Like 6 out of your last 8 or so. I mean, there's not even that many games, but you're going to have to go on a winning streak to win, and this team hasn't shown the ability to do that.
And if you take away Casey Tominaga, you have to play an entirely different style of basketball. You can play a different style of basketball, but it's just more physical and more slower pace. Now, they would have to make adjustments on the fly, which they kind of did against Northwestern a couple weekends ago. But, I mean, taking away Casey Tominaga completely changes the dynamic of the team. And, if Casey's not feeling well, that's one thing. But if, the coaches believe that, he's kind of hampering the offense, then, that's certainly concerning, given that he was one of our most, explosive players last season. Now, the early shot clock threes and, his limited skill set in terms of not driving to the basket, whether or not that's a play calling thing or he just can't do it is one thing. But it's kind of a little bit concerning here coming into that last stretch, and they got to figure out what to do with him and how he fits into this offense, because right now it's not working for anybody.
Yeah, and we'll see. I'm waiting for the brackets, the updated brackets to come out. I'm still thinking Nebraska will be in the field, but we'll see. And Nebraska, the women's team got beat, on Sunday or on Saturday by Caitlin Clark. So, that was kind of a bummer. But there was some good news. The wrestling team got a big win over Wisconsin, a ranked team. They beat them pretty handily. And Nash had a great, had another nice performance, racked up 19 points for a heavyweight, that's pretty hard to do. I mean, with a lot of takedowns and stuff. So I do keep wondering how, like if he's going to have an opportunity to be like an All-American, I think you have to place in like the top 8 or I don't quite remember, but I certainly think he has a chance. It's going to be fun to see. But that's coming up here in the next, I want to say in the next 4 or 5 weeks too, the NCAA wrestling tournament. So National Huskers will definitely give us a reason to follow there. They've got some potential national champions. But anyways, just wanted to mention that quickly. And then, we've got some recruiting stuff, not a ton of recruiting stuff. There was some visitors on campus this weekend. There's expected to be, coaches getting out on the road. So that'll be interesting, I think, with Kiana Wilhite in the 2024 class is kind of the one guy that's still out there. Tony White did pay him a visit last week. Michigan State send a bunch of coaches there to see him this week. Texas, I think, is doing the same thing. So it will be interesting to see if Matt Rule pops in. And I would say, if he does, then you think Nebraska probably is still in it. If not, then maybe they're kind of kicking the can, because this is going to be a signing day type of decision. So it'll be interesting to see, if Rule and maybe some more of the staff come with him. That's kind of been an approach they've taken before. It's just like, we'll send all of our coaches out there if we need to.
Yeah, and you remember they did that. Not they, but Scott Frost and his staff did it with Ty Robinson, and it worked. So we'll see. We'll see if that will work with Wilhite. And I think he would be another great addition to the 2024 class. I think he's from Arizona, defensive lineman. I mean, one thing that really intrigues me is that he's an 88 overall numerically, according to 24/7 Sports, and so he's a borderline, 4-star player when it comes to recruiting, and he's very athletic. He can play the edge, which is also very interesting because they focused on the edge a little bit more, I think, and I have no problem with that at all because good defenses, in my opinion, start on the edge. And then He's very mobile. He's very athletic. He can get into the backfield, get to the quarterback, and he can upset the offense's timing and how they want to call plays and things like that. So he would be a great addition to a class that's already stacked. I'm happy that most of the 2024 class is already on campus, and this class that's generated so much buzz. We're now almost at a point where we can see it kind of play out on the field a little bit.
Yeah, well, we'll be spring. Spring practices will be starting. Here in the next month or so. Winter, they're going through winter conditioning and winter workouts right now. But yeah, Wilhite would be interesting to add to this class. In the 2025 class, Nebraska did. They actually hosted some kids in 2025 and 2026. One guy that we mentioned before, Jalen Williams, 6'6". I'm blanking on what his weight is, but he's basically a really big defensive end, ranked 248 according to the On3 industry rankings. 24/7 has him in the top 200. He's out of Illinois, and I want to say he's like 6'6", 260 or 280. At any rate, Michigan was viewed as the leader, but he visited this weekend. He told Husker Online that his visit was an 11 out of 10, and that he was going to take an official visit at some point again this year.
They all say that.
Yeah, I know, but the fact that he said he was going to take an official visit, I think is a positive thing. Cortez Mills, dynamic wide receiver from Florida, said he's going to visit for the Colorado game. Philip Simpson, who's one of our off the field analysts, was his head coach for a while, and this guy's an absolute stud. He went over, I think he went over 100 yards in every single game last year. And this is, and he's playing in Miami, like the highest level of Miami-Dade. He had like 1,600 yards receiving. The staff apparently, views him, or they think he can be the next Devontae Smith. So, there's a reason that Matt Rule, there's a reason he saw Cortez Mills last week. So, I mean, in terms of 2025 recruits, I think Cortez Mills is, at very near the top of the board for Nebraska overall. So the fact that he's going to get a visit, it's going to be very difficult though to Georgia, everybody's going to be involved with this kid, but they do have that. And then Pierce Mooberry, 6'4", 200-pound athlete. And it's interesting because he was talked about some as a receiver, but he spent his time this weekend with his visit with Dvorak and with Tony White. So it looks like Nebraska recruiting him as a linebacker. He does have 2 crystal balls already for Nebraska. And then, he said that his visit went really well. And so I think they're a leader there. And he's, he's ranked 5th by 24/7 Sports, in the in-state rankings. So another, kid in the state of Nebraska that the Huskers are in a strong spot for. So got to feel good about that one, I think.
Absolutely. And you look at Mills, for example. Mills, he's a player that Nebraska has really been recruiting for quite some time. And it's kind of interesting to see them dip back into the state of Florida again. Philip Simpson, that was a big hire on the coaching staff. And, we've been talking about Cortez Mills, since July. So this isn't just a, let's try to recruit this guy. This is a guy that Nebraska's been working on for quite some time. And, Mills is so dynamic. He's a heck of a player. Nebraska's already got some Florida guys on campus and on the roster. So Mills is a guy that I feel comfortable about. I think his recruitment is going to be tough. But I think Nebraska does have a shot. And, I think Nebraska's in a good spot for Mooberry as well. I mean, I think what they've done in the 2024 class with getting all the in-state kids in the fold makes it an easier sell as well. And of course, results have to show on the field and games have to be played. But I'd feel good about Mills and Mooberry in particular.
And then, obviously the big names to watch, in terms of uncommitted guys in the 2025 class, obviously Chase Lofton. The tight end who, he's been visiting a bunch of people. So, Christian Jones, the other guy, they both visited Nebraska this month. I think the next thing is going to be to get them for the spring game. And, it's all part of a process. I posted something about on HuskerBigRed.com about this weekend and recruiting momentum. And, one of the comments, of course, that we always get is, how many commitments were there? How many commitments were there? Well, not every weekend's about commitments. It's still very early in the process. These kids are
Those are my
still.
favorite comments. Those are
It's
my
like,
favorites.
yeah, some people don't understand recruiting apparently, but
Or some people are just hard-headed.
yeah,
Because I saw this question posted on one of their groups that says, let's slow down. Scott Frost had top 15 recruiting classes, and Matt Rule, he has good classes, but let's see it on the field. How is he any different than Scott Frost? In hello, player development, player retention. Um, you know, it's not that hard to see that Matt Rule is miles ahead of where Scott Frost was in recruiting. I mean, it's just kind of crazy how some fans are impatient. And yes, that's Nebraska fans, and that's us. I mean, I remember I had my doubts about Matt Rule, and you had your doubts about Matt Rule after the Iowa game. But I think Rule is miles ahead of where Frost ever was.
yeah. I think Matt Rule. The second year is important, but he's doing all the all the right things, and yeah, it's just the recruiting stuff that just annoys me because it's like there's more about
Yep.
yes, there's a process in getting to a commitment. It
Yes.
doesn't happen the first time you get a kid on campus. So
If it
you know,
did, we'd be all set.
but I like where they're heading. And I think soon we can start talking about some of our, not that we haven't already, but some of the top targets in the 2025 class. But Nebraska's doing the work with those guys. It's going to be interesting to see what they do this week with some of their coaches. Where they send Glenn Thomas, for instance, if they send him to go see Alex Mansky. And it's interesting because that gives you an idea of what the priorities are, right? You can't, it's not like we're ever going to see what the recruiting board looks like for Nebraska, but actions speak louder than words, as they say. And so when coaches go to certain players or certain prospects, I mean, you can see how they're recruiting a player, what the where they value him. So that's what I'm interested to see in this week is I'm sure, I honestly feel like Rule will make some stops in the state of Nebraska, and then we'll see where he goes from there. But Keanu Wilhite's a name that I'm definitely watching, and Mansky, is another one too, with Glenn Thomas and those guys. And who knows, maybe even Dayton Raiola is going to be, because that's the next big target in my mind in terms of the quarterback position is Dayton Raiola.
I'm interested to see, the Mansky and Raiola recruitments and how they value one over the other, or if they do, or if they recruit on the same. I'm very interested to see, what happens there. And I'm also interested, like I said, in the Mills, how Cortez Mills kind of factors in with Nebraska. Because to Garrett McGuire's credit, he's been really, really good on the recruiting trail. And so I'm hoping that they can get another solid receiver in there, because it's all about, here's the other thing too. People say we have, for example, 50 wide receivers, 75 linebackers. Why do we keep recruiting them? It's all about stacking positions. Good programs stack positions with depth, and good programs have, first string gets injured, first string wide receiver gets injured, second guy comes in, there's very little drop off. That's what all the good programs have. And now, granted, not many Nebraska fans know that because we've never really had that in a while, but I mean, that's what this is about. So even if we were over recruit a position, I would rather us over recruit and miss than not recruit at all, because we've had that too. I mean, and we've suffered for it.
Yeah, again, it's not. You should never worry about position. It's like the NFL draft. If you're worrying about the position, it's not. They're not doing it right. For the most part. I mean, you have to. Quarterback is probably the one exception to that, but yeah, you get as many talented players as you can, especially nowadays in the transfer portal, and that's what Nebraska's doing. So yeah, I think they're doing a solid job on that front, and yeah, that's essentially. I feel like that's pretty much all the topics we got to cover. Anything else we got to cover here today, Danny?
Not that I can think of. It's been a pretty quiet week, which is a little bit rare. I don't know what to do with myself. I don't like. I usually have all these topics to write about, but not so much this week. Hopefully, hopefully things will pick up.
Yeah, I think there'll be some more recruiting stuff, and then we'll moving into baseball, softball season, so things will be picking up.
Baseball's going to be interesting. A big year for Will Bolt, in my opinion.
Yeah, he needs to get to the NCAA tournament. So does Fred Hoiberg. So at any rate, you guys, it'll be we'll be back on Wednesday. We can talk a little bit more about that Wisconsin matchup, and maybe we can get into the 2025 class a little bit more on recruiting. So make sure you check us out again. As always, hit the subscribe button and check out HuskerBigRed.com. And thanks again for watching, and go Big Red.
Go Big Red.